Hello, everyone. The world is going crazy. Coronavirus is sweeping the globe, and I'm going to be speaking with some Bitcoiners from around the world in the next couple of days to see what's going on in their part of the world and how they're dealing with it and the situation over there. Leo Weese, you're my first guest. You're the co-founder of the Bitcoin Association Hong Kong. Um, Thanks for taking this time for me. The
Thanks
first
for having
thing
me.
the first thing I'm noticing, you're sitting in a great location with a great view. And when I look out of your window, it's busy. There's cars, there's stuff going on. I've seen the videos from Italy with just empty roads, just nothing going on there at all. And Hong Kong seems buzzing. What's going on over there? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
We've never had a compulsory full lockdown, but we've definitely had our phase when streets are very quiet and people didn't go to the office and people didn't go to restaurants, and many museums or libraries or sports facilities were all closed. So starting in late January, people did very much fear the virus here in Hong Kong. And they did very much fear that, yeah, the virus is already around them. It's about to break out. Everybody could be already infected. And people prepared. People responded, kind of activated their response that they remembered from SARS in 2003, which definitely left some scars and trauma in the city. So people self-isolated pretty much instinctively. Now,
Right. So
we had very few cases throughout February, and people slowly started to become more comfortable with going out again. And what you see now outside of this window and in the MTR and in the offices and food courts is that people feel like the threat is gone, which may or may not be true.
right. So it looks like the peak is already behind you.
That's what it felt like, but people very much fear that over the last week or two, there have been many people returning from Europe, many students, many Hong Kong workers who live in Europe, many Hong Kong residents who've been on holiday in Europe, and as they return, the number of cases goes up again. And today we had 40 new cases, which is about 20% of all the cases we've ever had in Hong Kong. Well, about 10% of all the cases we've ever had in Hong Kong. And people, people very much feel that, like, again, an outbreak could be imminent. And I do expect that over the weekend, things will be very slow again. And there might be more office closures, and there might be more slow of a social life. Pretty much all the events that I plan to go to this weekend have been canceled. They've probably been canceled for good reasons.
Right. So a lot of the new cases are actually imported. Are there any calls to close the borders or anything like that?
So currently, almost all of the cases are either directly imported or close relatives of imported cases. But many of these imported cases might go undetected, and there might be some kind of clusters around. There was one reported around a wedding. There's another cluster reported around a bar, another cluster around a fitness center. As of yesterday, the border is effectively shut. Everybody, no matter where they come from in the world, have to quarantine for 14 days. If they come from high-risk regions such as Hubei in China, or Lombardy in Italy, or the eastern part of France, they have to go into a government quarantine center, which is effectively a public housing unit where you have your own little apartment, your own little bathroom. You have to stay inside for 14 days. And everybody else gets a bracelet, has to download an app, has to connect this app with this bracelet. This bracelet is really just a QR code, and then has to register online. And they have to report their temperature, and they have to report their symptoms every day until 14 days have passed, and they are free to go out.
Interesting.
So
you mentioned before that a lot of people stopped going to restaurants and stores and these kinds of things. Was this completely voluntary, or was it also the government shutting some of these places down? Or
the government shut down the libraries, the museums, the sports facilities. The government shut down its own offices. Most banks or insurance companies closed their branches. They implemented work from home policies. I think a lot of this is, driven by this memory of 2003, this memory of SARS, which in a way was much more deadly. There was much less global travel back then. It did mainly wreak havoc in Hong Kong. There were about 3,000 cases back then and 300 dead. It was over much more quicker. It was a little bit easier to contain, since unlike with the novel coronavirus and SARS, which is also a coronavirus, people were only infectious when they had symptoms. So in 2003, having temperature checks and making sure that people who have any kind of fever or symptoms are not going out is a lot more effective than it is today, where somebody can be highly infectious without realizing it, without really realizing that like their mild symptoms might be actually the virus. So people do wear masks. I do think that is quite important to containing the spread. People love to overuse their hand sanitizer. I do think they also wash their hands often enough. I do know people who have completely gone into hiatus. They've completely been hiding in their apartments for the last 6 weeks. I personally have been going, for example, hiking, or have been going out to the streets. We have been told, and we are under the impression that as long as you're outside, it is relatively safe. As long as you're not like in a close encounter, in a closed train carriage or a bus, there's not necessarily a strong need to wear a mask. Even though people, of course, probably also shouldn't take it off as they walk from their office to the train, or from the train to the restaurant. So almost everybody you see on the street, including me, is wearing a mask. We've also been still hosting Bitcoin meetups. I think we are among the last ones to still do so. There's a lot of discussion of whether this is sane or whether this is reckless. We've had about 5 people in January, which was the peak of the scare in Hong Kong. We've had about maybe 10 people in February, and also about 10, 12 people this month. We've hosted all of these outside. We have had the luck of not having any person infected, but it is a risk that we find quite difficult to weigh.
Right. So when it comes to, for example, social distancing and wearing masks, which you mentioned, which you say is in large part because there's this culture in Hong Kong which they got from the SARS outbreak.
And I do think there's a distrust in the government too.
What's that?
I think there's a very healthy distrust in the government.
Right.
And the government has been telling Hong Kongers not to wear masks. The Hong Kong government has been trying to say everything's fine. The Hong Kong government did not want to close its offices. They did not want to close the border. It was mainly the pressure from the people that have been leading to these policies, and that have been kind of averting a health crisis so far. The people do tend to listen more to their doctors, and their local doctors say, we might need the mask more than you do, but if you do have a mask, or if you have something like a mask, even if it's a self-made one, or even if it's just a scarf, then you are better off using it. Not because the mask protects you from others, but because the mask protects others from you. And I think the close to 100% mask rate is very much helping in just making sure that you cannot touch your own face, making sure that if you sneeze, you sneeze into your mask. You don't sneeze into your hands. You don't breathe into the train or bus.
Right. You're originally from Italy yourself. Do you think this kind of cultural change could happen in Italy or other parts of the West? And what would it take?
I very much see it happening right now. I'm just listening to my parents and to my cousins talk about the kind of pictures they see posted. If I read the local newspapers, they had this kind of, they reached out to people and asking them to submit pictures of themselves at home in quarantine of how they deal with the virus. And many of these pictures of people wearing masks or scarves. The leading health officials have at a press conference themselves worn masks and even just demonstrated how you can tie a scarf around your neck. they do discuss making it mandatory to make a scarf or something to cover your mouth when you go to the supermarket. I think it's quite problematic, especially for the people working in the supermarket, the people working still dealing with customers, that they don't have some kind of mask. There's also a local textile company that has started to produce masks, even though I believe the production facilities are actually in China. But they do intend to make masks, distribute, make sure that the local doctors have enough stock, make sure that everybody in the civil service and everybody who has to deal with customers is being given some kind of protection. If you are a infected person going to the supermarket, there is some risk you infect others. If you're an infected worker at a supermarket, there's a risk you infect hundreds.
Yeah. In some countries, including Italy, we're now seeing sort of surveillance state kind of solutions where people's phones are GPS tracked to see if they're not moving around too much. Of course, in Hong Kong, you had the protest movement over the past year or so. I think this was also in part rejecting this kind of the Chinese surveillance state. How does this play into each other? Is there anything like that going on in Hong Kong, surveillance mechanisms to keep people inside, or are people rejecting that? Or
so on one hand, the kind of privacy protections that exist in Europe, they already have exemptions in Hong Kong for these large health issues. So there is an emergency law for pandemics, which was introduced around the SARS times, which does allow the government to, without worrying about the privacy implications, to, for example, ask where you've been, or ask the restaurant what kind of staff they have, or currently figure out from payment receipts who has been visiting a place that had an outbreak. If you're a fitness center, you usually wouldn't be just forced to give out your customer data to every government official who comes by, but currently that is possible. So the hope is that these laws are limited in scope. They are limited to an outbreak. If the government is trying to use these powers outside of a pandemic, then we are able to challenge them in court. But of course, we fear that this pandemic might last longer, and we fear that a lot of these policies are just going to become permanent. I'm probably not too worried about a temperature check when I enter a supermarket or office, but I would be worried about having a bracelet that tracks my location or that records my heartbeat. We very much expect that the kind of tests that Hong Kong is aggressively doing, even on pets, if you are infected, they even test your pets. And some of these pets have been tested positive. But we fear that these tests are going to become a lot more, well, and on one side, we hope that they're going to become a lot more cheap and practical and fast. On the other hand, these tests might be done before you board a plane in the next year. And every time you want to go somewhere, you have to undergo some kind of saliva swab, right? And then who knows, maybe the airport is then in 2 or 3 years, they find it very tempting to send you customized ads based on your genome.
Right. All right. To close it off, what do you expect to happen in the near term in Hong Kong? Is it are you going to defeat this virus, or?
I'm continuing social distancing for the next week or two. If we had a Bitcoin meetup right now, we would probably not host it this week. There have been enough people coming back that from heavily affected regions, and we're kind of going through the same fear and the same issues as we've been going through in late January already. So we know the drill, but we still have this uncertainty because we also will have difficulties containing a real outbreak. But we will also know more in a week or two whether the people who have been coming back have been following their quarantine, have been submitting their health reports. And as it looks right now, the people who have been confirmed today or yesterday haven't been much in contact with others. They've been staying in their hotels, they've been staying at home. And if that turns out to be the norm, and if not too many people slip through the radar, then I very much expect that in 2 years, life is slowly going to come back onto the streets. And then we will have to figure out how to deal with the long-term implications of travel. Because Hong Kong is not going to allow this virus to build up some kind of herd immunity. They're not going to allow this to sweep through societies, as it has been speculated in Europe or the US. And so we will keep the border shut until maybe some other countries that follow similar policy might have some retrospective agreement with Hong Kong. And that might mean that in a year or in half a year, we see some kind of like Asia free health zone of Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, Hong Kong, Japan maybe, where we are able to freely travel again, but where we aren't able to go to a place like the Philippines or Indonesia or India, because they are not going to have this outbreak under control. And of course, it's entirely possible that this free health zone, whatever we might want to call it, is not going to include the United States and is not going to include the European Union. And that's going to have quite massive long-term effects.
I agree. All right. Thanks a lot, Leo. Thanks for your time.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Nice talking to you.
You too.